Hi everyone. In today's video we're going to look at checkmating the king using king and rook only. So I wanted to start with the position here that we're actually trying to reach to deliver the checkmate. So we can see that the white king is opposite the black king, and the black king has been forced to the edge of the board here. Forcing the king to the edge of the board is a key concept in delivering this checkmate, because we have to deliver the checkmate along one of these edges here using the rook. So now that white has forced the black king to the edge of the board and is directly opposite the king, we can now deliver the checkmate using the rook on a7. So white now plays the rook from a7 to a8, where it checks the black king from the side, and it therefore stops the black king from moving left or right, and the king, the white king which is in front of the black king, is stopping the black king from coming up the board to either of these three squares. So as we can see, the king is boxed in, and that's checkmate. So now that we've had a look at the final checkmating position, let's take a look at how we actually get to that. So the first thing to say is that we need to use our rook to cut off the king's space. So in this position, it's white to move. The black king is on e5 here. And as said, we want to drive the black king to one of the four edges of the board. Now, you can drive the black king to any one of those four edges. Which one you drive it to really depends on the position of the black king. So if the black king was way over here on g5, for example, then it would be very logical to start trying to drive the king to the h file in order to deliver the checkmate here. Because the king is on e5, we can see that it's in this half of the board. If I just quickly draw some arrows around that. And so therefore it makes sense to start driving the king towards this edge of the board. So to do that, we can now play the rook up from c2 into this c4 square. And suddenly the rook is now looking left and right along this rank. And therefore we're cutting the king from proceeding towards this side of the board. It's now black to move, and the most logical move for black here is to move away from the white king and towards the white rook, therefore attacking it. Now, as said, we've just moved the rook up to the fourth rank here because we want to cut off this space and start driving the king backwards down the board. So it wouldn't now make sense to play a retreating move with the rook, let's say for example to c1, because then the black king can start advancing down the board and we haven't actually made progress. So if I run it back here, the way in which we want to play is move the rook away from the black king and keep it on the same rank. So the most logical move for white here is to move the rook to the right hand side, the long side of the board, because then the rook is far away from the black king and it can't be pestered again by the king and attacked. If black were to now follow the rook, then the move is now handed back to white, and white needs to consider what to do. So we know that we want to get the white king opposite the black king. However, if we were to do this straight away, then we have a problem, because it's now black to move, and the moment that black moves left or right, let's move left by one square in this position, suddenly we're no longer opposite the black king, and if we try to give this check with the rook, the black king can escape down the board. So the only way we can ever check the black king and force it backwards down the board is if the kings are opposite each other. So this is a really important concept to remember. The kings have to be opposite each other for the white rook to then deliver the check and force the king backwards down the board, or deliver checkmate if it's already on the very back edge. So if we run it back a move, in this position here, it doesn't make sense for white to go opposite the black king because black can then move away. So instead we need to play a waiting move. So the ideal waiting move here is to move the rook along this rank so that we keep the king cut off and as far away from the black king as possible. So I'll play the rook over to a4. It's now black to move. If the black king were to step to the right hand side, suddenly we have the opposition. The white king is opposite, it cuts off these 3 squares, and we can now deliver a check with the rook, and the black king is forced to step backwards, and we've made progress. We're forcing the king now towards the edge of the board. If I just run it back now a couple of moves, and let's pretend that black didn't play along nicely and move the king opposite the white king like so. Instead, what if black started chasing the white rook again? Well, in this position we can now start following the king with the white king in order to try and gain the opposition the moment that black is forced to move back towards our own king. So if black keeps chasing towards our rook, we keep following with our king. And in this position, when the black king actually attacks the rook, we swing it over to the other side of the board, and now black is going to be forced at some point to come opposite the white king. Let's say they keep running away, we keep following. They're now forced to come back or else give ground towards the edge. Say they come back towards our king. Now we don't follow with our own king because again then the black king can start running away. Instead we play a waiting move with the rook. So we move the rook here to wait a move. Black then either has to run away some more or come opposite the white king. Say they continue running, we continue chasing, and now they're forced to come opposite, and suddenly we can check and drive the king backwards down the board. And if we just run it back for a couple of moves to this position, if for some reason the black king didn't come opposite the white king here, and instead they decided to voluntarily give ground, then we can now use our rook to cut off the space that black has voluntarily given. So we move the rook down the board 1 square, and suddenly we're cutting off this rank now, and we're making progress towards the edge of the board. So I'll just play through a few sample moves now to finish this position. Let's say that black starts moving towards the white rook again. White then brings the king in. Black keeps coming. White follows. Black now attacks the white rook, so white swings it away from the king. Black continues running, white follows. Once the kings are opposite each other, white now gives the check with the rook. Black is forced to give ground, white follows. Here the king doesn't step opposite, because otherwise the black king could keep running away. Instead, white plays a waiting move with the rook. Black runs 1 square to the side, white follows, and black is then forced back. We give a check, and now black is forced to the back edge of the board, which is what we've been aiming for. White keeps following. Black is approaching the white rook, so white swings the rook away. Black keeps running away, white follows. And then we reach this final position. The white king is opposite the black king, and checkmate can then be delivered. I hope you found that video helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I hope to see you again in another video.